Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the publisher of Iron Circus Comics. It's C. Spike Trotman. Thanks for coming on, Spike.
Hey, everybody.
So as we record this, there are 12 days left in the campaign to crowdfund the latest Iron Circus project, the Poorcraft Cookbook. You're at 438% in funding it. All's well on the funding front, but when you're at that point in the campaign where seemingly on the outside, this seems like it should be the easy street point of it. I don't know if an easy street point of a campaign like this actually exists. How's your day going? Are you feeling good about everything where you're at right now?
The best way to describe it is, and this is something that was first presented to me as a possibility, by the way, by my husband, Matt, who deserves credit for pointing this out. He has pointed out I am literally never happy. And this is very likely a side effect of being just a naturally ambitious person. I've always been a naturally ambitious person. And there are times where in the past, when I had crowdfunding projects on Kickstarter, I would say something like, okay, it's going well, but if it closes out at X amount, then I'll finally be happy. And just from like across the room, my husband would be like, no, you won't. And he would just say, yeah, you're never happy. That's you. You are just never happy. You say, oh, if this makes $100,000, I'll be happy. But then when it makes $100,000, you're like, if I'd really pushed, it could have done 150, but I guess this is fine, which is true. And it hasn't changed now that I'm crowdfunding independently. I almost approach it from this angle that Kickstarter made me soft. And that sounds weird, but when I say that, what I mean is it let me rest on my laurels a little bit. One of the killer apps of Kickstarter was it was a centralization of a process. A lot of us in the comics world anyway were already doing. It had a website that was transparent, automated. It had spreadsheets and organization that a lot of us could not or would not do, so that fulfillment would be easy. And also it had searchability and discoverability, which is pretty much impossible to do on your own website. A person who just likes comics can go to the comics section, browse back 3 or 4 projects, and they might have never heard of you otherwise. And that was a huge boon when I was running Kickstarter projects. A third to a quarter, I'd say, of the projects near the end were just what I referred to as looky-loos, people who had never heard of me or any of my projects before, but just like comics, and we're just browsing the comics section and, oh, hey, what's this? And when I went into our first independent crowdfund, I went into it with the attitude that that entire cohort was gone. I was not going to get that. So I couldn't be lazy. I couldn't be complacent. I couldn't just rely on someone to funnel me traffic the way Kickstarter had in the past. So this time around, we've hired a professional promotion. We're running Twitter ads. We're running Facebook ads. We're running Instagram ads. We're trying everything. And this has kind of almost bled into a overall Iron Circus thing from now on, where I feel like we are now done with organic growth. It's time to pay to play.
Yeah.
So that's what my days have kind of been filled with. I'm promoting the campaign. I want it to finish out, obviously, doing as well as possible. And while you could argue the proof of concept has already occurred, it's clear I can independently fund a project, that's fine. My ambition prevents me from being happy with 400% funding.
Well, you can't keep building if you are satisfied with where you were last time.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, it seems to me it's like you had all this infrastructure that made it. I remember one thing you said the last time you were on this podcast is you said that one of the most powerful tools you had was when you had a new campaign launch, you could basically just press a button that would send an email to everyone that had previously backed it. And then all of a sudden they would be notified, hey, there's this new campaign from Iron Circus Comics. And without that type of infrastructure, you not only have to build your own infrastructure, but you also have to build up your methods of communicating with people and everything like that. And I have to say, I was actually served a Twitter ad for this yesterday. And so I have to say, as soon as I saw that, I was like, I wonder if this is resulting in not requirements, needs to like push in different ways than you had before? Like, did you ever advertise for the Kickstarter ones?
I advertised for the Kickstarter ones, but it was never in sort of an organized and planned way. I had the campaign running for, a few days, and then I was like, I guess we should do some banner ads. And then we'd mosey over and do some banner ads. I think the one that benefited most from our banner ads in general was the Cautionary Fables and Fairy Tales Stories of North America, the Woman in the Woods volume. I think that cleared almost, but not quite 330K. And that one, while it was running maybe the last week and a half, it was all over Facebook. It was inescapable from what I'm told. And it just hit an amazing sweet spot. And I think we spent something like $40,000 on the promo for that, but it ended up bringing in 3 times that. So
I'm just imagining you when you were moving into this. Previously, I was expecting this, like, stressed room full of people trying to figure out the infrastructure of all this. And now, because you're talking about how, like, you felt like you had gotten complacent when you were on Kickstarter or something like that, you wanted to push a little bit harder. Now I'm envisioning it as like a boxing montage where it's like you lost the previous fight and now you're like, I gotta be even better for this one. And then when you have the rematch, you're gonna totally crush it. That's kind of how I envision it now, which is not where I was before this chat already.
Yeah, it's like the Rocky bit. But yeah, and I've been terrible for the past week or so. I've been watching a lot of stuff on YouTube that's like, how to maximize your Facebook ads, 5 dumb mistakes you're making with your ad campaign, where I never watched that stuff before 2 weeks ago. But now I'm crafting not just event campaigns, which is sort of what I'm doing right now qualifies as. Like, there's this big limited time thing happening. Pay attention. You won't be able to do this in 2 weeks. Buy now. But I'm also interested in awareness campaigns, which is, hi, I exist.
Yeah.
And hi, I exist campaigns are campaigns I've never done before. And again, 2 weeks ago, had no interest in ever doing, because I was kind of living in that bubble where I was like, I'll be fine no matter what. No matter what I put on Kickstarter, it'll fund, and it'll fund beautifully. And that's good enough. But my mindset has completely changed now. And I'm basically in the Iron Circus Slack, because Iron Circus, by the way, everyone, is run out of a Slack, planning awareness campaigns for Iron Circus as a company and our backlist and our upcoming front list, and just sort of planning this saturation campaign. Because being in business at this point for a decade plus, one of the things that I'm always learning is there's always someone who just heard of me yesterday.
Yeah.
And I want to make that experience as good and interesting as possible. There's always someone who is scrolling through Instagram and suddenly they'll just see an ad for the Poorcraft Cookbook, and that is the first they've heard of me. And maybe they go, oh, what's this? And they click over to the Facebook page. And, I'm not a huge fan of Meta, just like everybody else, but it's one of those deals where I feel obligated to learn this system, because it's not just about me. It hasn't been just about me for a decade plus. There are people who look to me for paychecks, and it is my obligation to make sure they do as well as possible. And part of that is maintaining a Iron Circus Facebook page, and actually caring about that Facebook page is this new novel thing that I've been doing.
I have so many thoughts on this, and it would be totally a sidetrack. My day job is as a digital marketing director at an advertising agency.
Oh.
And so, like, this is totally my world. I have so many thoughts. And I just want to say, though, it is very cool to hear that someone in comics is working in this way, because I honestly think that, digital advertising offers a lot of opportunities to comic book creators. Some of it's difficult because it's like the direct market, trying to build a sense of urgency through ads for something that's going to come out in 3 months is kind of a contradictory concept. But for something like you're doing, it's like finding those people and then activating them towards your site and engaging to pre-order and everything like that. That is a very short distance in terms of the digital experience. And it's awesome that you're getting into that.
Yeah. And it's one of the nice things about, I hate saying one of the nice things about Facebook, but it is what it is. One of the nice things about Facebook's is the dashboard, behind the scene metrics are incredibly informative.
Yes.
And it's telling me, here's the age group that is the most likely to want to look at your stuff from your track record of ads you've already posted. And here is the ad which performed the best. So you might want to think about making all your future ads more like this ad, stuff like that.
It's amazing. But, we're here to talk about this crowdfunding effort we're already discussing. But I think it'd be necessary to go back to like the beginning to set the stage for listeners to this conversation.
Oh, yes.
So I would say that beyond Iron Circus, the thing that you're most famous for is being one of the most, it's not even beyond, it's like part and parcel with it. One of the things you're most famous for is being one of the most successful people in the history of Kickstarter, with 31 campaigns getting funded 31 times for a total of about $2.5 million.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely people in the comics realm who have made more than me, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but every time there's a Lady Death Kickstarter, I know it makes like 300,000 or something like that. But in a way, I don't really count that, because that's someone who's been around for how many decades?
Yeah.
And he's selling to his fan base. And so it's not like a publisher per se. It's a creator.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really like categorize it as the same.
Sure.
But yeah, it's like it's been wild. I always talk about how Iron Circus was basically born and grown on Kickstarter, which is it was at one point a fairly unique thing in comics. And we were definitely the first publisher to actually work crowdfunding into the publishing strategy and just make it a standard part of it, a thing that some creators, when they're pitching books to me, like explicitly state, and we would definitely want a Kickstarter, back when I was using the site.
Well, I think it's interesting, though, because as of the end of August 2021, it was August 25th, 2021, an article went up on Forbes where you were talking about, I think it was kind of in response to all the Substack stuff. You did a chat with Rob Sikowitz over at Forbes about how crowdfunding is still the direction for you. And, you were advocating for Kickstarter as a platform. And then just basically 3 months later, December 8th hit and the crowdfunding platform released. Honestly, extremely bizarre and nebulous plan for moving to the blockchain. I honestly do not understand it to this day. But before that day hit, before the rug was pulled, could you have imagined a near-term future for Iron Circus that did not include Kickstarter?
Well, at this point, I mean, I should say at that point, early December, I kind of had zero incentive to stop using Kickstarter.
Right.
I would say maybe a third to a half of all the books we were publishing hit Kickstarter. And that was a huge boon to us, having all these books that could go to press in the black. And that's something not a lot of small publishers can manage. But at the same time, we had titles. Our best-selling title of 2021 never saw Kickstarter. That was Banned Book Club. But at the same time, we had Abby Howard's books that did amazing on Kickstarter. So to my mind, why not the best of both worlds? There were people who kind of would occasionally present arguments about how I no longer, air quotes, needed Kickstarter. But people were telling me that from literally the very first project. So I never really thought it held much water.
Well, and it's not like, let's say you fund one of your books through Kickstarter and you get all that and you find you get all the discoverability you talked about through Kickstarter's platform. It's not like after that ends, that book ceases to exist to be sold. At that point, you can continue to sell it. So like you said, it was really the best of both worlds. But what was your initial reaction to learning that Kickstarter was planning to make that move? Was it just, I need to talk to people there and figure out what the hell's going on?
It was me sending an email. Before I even said anything publicly, I sent an email to someone I knew over there. And I was all like, hey, what is this? And their reply was, I have no idea. I was not included in this decision, but I will ask and I will get back to you. And they tagged in a bunch of, CC'd in, I should say, a bunch of other people at Kickstarter. And eventually they got back to me and they linked me to that secondary update that Kickstarter put out, which was not enlightening at all and didn't clarify anything and didn't give them a motive. And I was just like, this is not helpful.
Yeah.
And then we had a Zoom about it. And I was just like, is there a roadmap? Why is this being done? I just want one justification. And with people actually there talking to me, I didn't get that. So despite the fact that I know people over there and I have people over there I 100% consider friends and I would like catch lunch with them anytime to this day, I could no longer be a part of whatever it is Kickstarter is doing. I mean, I have my completely unsubstantiated, reckless assumptions and theories about why this choice is being made, but I have nothing to substantiate any of that. I have no evidence or no proof. So it would feel really irresponsible to sit here and be like, this is why they're doing it, because I asked them why they're doing it. And the two answers I've gotten are, I don't know, and it'll be great. Which isn't an answer.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that was the most troubling about the announcement is like, I read that white paper. I am like vaguely associated. I mean, I work in the digital space. I don't do anything involving the blockchain. Blockchain is basically like, I don't know, a fantasy subject to me. But it does seem like the two times that I hear it come up is when it's something that sounds like absolute nonsense, which this kind of did, or something that sounds vaguely fraudulent, which is not a great combination of things. Yeah. And it was just really weird because most of the time when I look at something like this, I'm like, okay, I don't agree with it, but I guess I understand it. In this case, I was like, what is this?
Yeah, it's absolutely mystifying why this choice is being made. And under those circumstances, I was not content to stick around and continue giving Kickstarter their 5% cut of every project I funded, even if that meant the projects I was funding could potentially take a hit financially.
Yeah. So you made a decision to effectively create your own crowdfunding solution on Iron Circus's site, which I think is brilliant and also like totally fits the vibe of Iron Circus completely. It like feels like a natural progression. You know what you're doing when it comes to the post-campaign stuff. It really just came down to problem solving, I imagine. But
yeah, how
quickly did you decide to build out your own platform after the Kickstarter news hit?
It was like maybe a week after I got confirmation they were absolutely not going to walk this back. This is not something they were going to rethink. It looks like from subsequent updates and interviews and what have you, they're not going to switch over to the blockchain, whatever that may mean, immediately or even in the near future.
Sure.
But they have not walked it back. They have not said they've rethought doing it or anything. It's still in the works. And I would rather not be there when that happens. So maybe a week after my meeting, my second email with them, I should say, I was talking to my tech guy and I was talking to the rest of Iron Circus. And at the beginning of January, I sent out an email to my creators going, those of you I have promised crowdfundings for will still get them, but they will not be on Kickstarter. If you're super angry, if you have any questions, if you want to talk about it, I understand. And nobody had an issue with it. So everyone who is going to get a crowdfunding initiative for their book, who has asked for it, or who I think it would work really well for, they will get it. They will simply get it on ironcircus.com as opposed to Kickstarter. And part of the reason I decided to just go fully in-house instead of opting for another third-party platform is I don't want to have to do this again. I don't want to have to pick everything up and move house for a second time because, Fundyland.com or whatever decides it wants to start selling NFTs or whatever other nefarious bullshit things, pardon my French, that people are doing these days to sort of squeeze the last drop of blood from the stone.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. You don't want to go somewhere, get completely situated, get comfortable, become like associated with whatever named company it is, Fundyland, as you said, and then just have to shift again. I mean, one thing I really like about all of this is how, I don't know if symmetrical is the right word, but it feels cosmically correct that all of this is happening in such a way. Because, I mean, Poorcraft was the first book you kickstarted, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the original Poorcraft, it was the perfect idea for Kickstarter because Kickstarter's whole sort of brief back then, their whole mission statement is like, good ideas brought to life, creativity given funding. And Poorcraft was the book I'd talked about for years previously wanting to make. And I just didn't have the money to fund an artist. I could write the script, that'd be fine. But I there was no money for an artist, and I didn't want to have anyone working for free. That
Right.
sucks. Don't be that person. So it was just backburnered for years until I heard about Kickstarter and got the book funded that way.
I just think it makes a lot of sense because the whole doing it yourself, the DIY feel to the Iron Circus kind of crowdfunding platform. Although, it's interesting. When I was thinking about it, I think it's interesting that the Iron Circus site says pre-order now instead of back this or something like that, which makes sense though, because you are, people are charged immediately, right? So it's a slightly different animal than Kickstarter. It's almost like a pre-order experience with like crowdfunding aesthetics and amenities.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like real talk for maybe the last 7-8 years. The books that we've been putting on Kickstarter, they were already going to be published kind of no matter what.
Right.
So it wasn't, the stakes were no longer, this book will not exist if you don't back it. And I was very careful not to say that if it wasn't true. We had developed at that point an operations budget where that if we were kickstarting a book for $20,000 and it didn't make it, we would still be able to print the book. So it felt disingenuous to be all like, help this book exist after a certain point. So really, I've been pre-ordering books via Kickstarter for years. And now that it's happening on IronCircus.com, I'm just pretty much maintaining the same language that I was using on later Kickstarters.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So when you reached out to all of the creators and said, like, this is the way it's going forward, I imagine most people, you said that everyone was very receptive to it. I'm not surprised by that because the Kickstarter blockchain thing was very poorly received in the creator community for understandable reasons.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, did you already know that the Poorcraft Cookbook was going to be like your maiden voyage on this?
The Poorcraft Cookbook literally had a behind-the-scenes Kickstarter page under construction when the word came down. So that was going to be the first project of the year, kind of regardless.
Yeah.
And we immediately pulled back after it became clear this was not some horrible joke or weird mistake. They were absolutely doing it. And we just copy-pasted a lot of the text from the, hidden, unlaunched Poorcraft Kickstarter page directly onto the Iron Circus crowdfund page.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse 2, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. How far out do you normally have these Kickstarter, or these crowdfunding efforts planned?
We have one coming up in April. We have just taken delivery on the finished video for it. So we like to have these we like to get started on planning them, which means meeting with the creator if there is one, and meeting with the promotional person if we're using one at least 3 or 4 months beforehand, and then having the actual promotional video and any derivatives of the video, like GIFs and so on and so forth, ready to go 3 months beforehand. And we build out the page in the second month. But between building out the page and getting the delivered video for the page, we like to make sure we have a fulfillment solution organized. And
Sure.
We work with 2 fulfillment companies. One is called Easy Ship and the other is called White Squirrel. And it's pretty much just about their schedules. We write and we ask who's free the month the book shows up in the warehouse and can fulfill it for us. And whoever is free gets it, because we run large projects and we run frequent projects. So we won't necessarily always have access to a single fulfillment agency's time. We can't monopolize them completely. So that's why we work with 2. And we start planning Kickstarters, honestly, the moment the book is signed if the creator wants a Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't actually set the gears in motion until the completed like files for the book are in our Dropbox.
Nice. I just want to give a quick shout out to White Squirrel. Good call on that, because Andrea Demonakos rules. That's awesome.
Oh, Andrea's the best. The only problem I have is I also work with another Andrea. So
too many Andreas.
Yeah, like, which Andrea said that? Other Andrea. No, not that Andrea. Andrea D. Not Andrea P. I'm like, okay.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Confusion
Too many
has
Andreas.
occurred.
Okay, so you said you made this decision about a week after this all kind of started rolling, all the stuff with Kickstarter. Where do you start with something like this? Is it about figuring out the technical elements from the start, or is it more about, I mean, I guess you don't really need to conceptualize and figure out what this would be like, because you already know, you knew what the Kickstarter was going to be. It was just translating that over onto your own platform, right?
Exactly. Pretty much what I said is, and I understand, I just want to preface all of this with, I am a publisher, everyone. I am not an individual creator trying to fund a single book. You know, I am someone who is looking to build infrastructure that I will be using for years to come. So my priorities and definitely my budget is going to be very different from a lot of people who might be listening. But with that out of the way, I talked to my IT tech, who is a guy named Kevin, and I told Kevin I would like you to find a plugin for WordPress, which is what the Iron Circus site runs off of. I would like you to find a plugin for WordPress that gives the most Kickstarter-like experience imaginable, something that will look familiar to people and they'll instantly understand if they've ever backed any project from me in the past, or even any project on any crowdfunding site. And I would like you to find something I can use over and over, and cost is no object. So Kevin went looking around and he eventually suggested something called WP crowdfunding. And the version I am running is individual lifetime, I believe it's called, which basically means I paid $400 for access to the code and for help installing the code. And I can use it over and over as much as I want for the rest of my life. And that has already paid for itself. If you factor in what I would owe Kickstarter right now from what the total is on the crowdfund that we're running, I would be well over $1,000 right now, what Kickstarter's 5% cut would be. And I paid $400 for WP crowdfunding. So
forever.
Yeah, exactly. Forever. If I never use it again, it'll have paid for itself.
I do think it's really smart. When I look at the page, it feels like you use kind of Kickstarter's look as a starting point visually and structurally. And that seems super important to me, because, you mentioned this a little bit yourself, but it's, you want the people who are used to backing you on Kickstarter to have as few obstacles as possible to understanding what you're doing, how to participate. So I imagine like that visual and structural breakdown was absolutely essential when you were kind of planning this.
Yeah, exactly. Like the way I thought about it is, if you play a lot of video games these days, if you're starting up a new game, if you press W, no matter what game it is, you expect to be walking forward.
Yes.
And that if you don't walk forward when you press W, you're instantly confused and you're stopped, and everything comes to a screeching halt and you're taken aback and you're like looking around. And one of the things, and this, apologies everyone, I'm so sorry. One of the things that is a part of marketing is streamlining and making sure everything is as straightforward and instantly understandable as possible, so there are as few hurdles between interest and purchase as possible, which is why Amazon hasn't sold a one-click buy button, so you don't have time to think about it. You just click one button and you bought it. And I want people to look at the pre-order the Poorcraft Cookbook crowdfund page, see the campaign story, be like, oh yeah, like Kickstarter. And now that they're thinking, oh yeah, like Kickstarter, they know how to back it. They go down to the rewards section and they mouse over and there's a select reward and they're off to the races.
I think one thing that's really important about how you built this is that you were not doing this. This is not a one-off. This is not you building this for the Poorcraft Cookbook. This is you building this for the future.
Yep.
Did you go into, building out that structure, working with Kevin, who I have to imagine is probably one of the low-key MVPs of this whole experience?
Very much so.
Were you building that out with that long-term look in mind, like trying to integrate like kind of technical elements that maybe you learned from Kickstarter that would help move it forward? Like, one thing I mentioned earlier was the button to notify people who backed previously. Were you trying to work in elements like that, or is it just trying to make it work as well up front and then build out those elements later on?
I wanted it as complete on launch as possible. I wanted it as Kickstarter-like as possible, right down to there being a literal area called risks and challenges at the bottom.
That's smart.
It had to be, yeah, just Kickstarter. So at some point they added a whole thing at the bottom that is you can't launch your project without filling it out. And it is basically you acknowledging this might not happen. This is a creative venture. There is no guarantee that it will come to pass. And I, since before I can remember, have been using that section to basically say, it's not my first rodeo.
Right.
This is my, 30th project. 27 of my previous projects have all been fulfilled and completed. The rest are in the process of being fulfilled. My track record speaks for itself. So, I even copy pasted that language from Kickstarter into the bottom of the first independent crowdfunding page because I wanted that familiarity. And I think, again, that's super important. Familiarity, being comfortable with the site, knowing what to expect.
Did you have any concerns up front about this, or is it less about concern and more about how the hell do I figure this out?
My biggest concern was it just wouldn't work.
Like the platform itself?
Yeah, I couldn't convince people to back me if I wasn't actually on Kickstarter, that it was going to be this great big public flop and it was going to be eternal and embarrassing and something I couldn't erase from the internet. And if that did happen, if it wasn't and I just reloaded it, it's currently at 445% funding with about 2 weeks to go. If it didn't fund, what was I going to say to the creators who were expecting crowd funds from me? And I told I wasn't going to use Kickstarter anymore. That was what I was really concerned about, that it just wouldn't work or it would dramatically underperform. And that would put in jeopardy the paychecks of people who rely on me to do as right by their books as possible.
Can I just say that you had the most double-edged sword reassurance that has ever existed? Because you were like, oh God, is this going to work? And then your site crashed and you're like, I know it's going to work now, but I have a different problem. This sucks.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And the thing is, we did everything in our power to try and make the site function. We knew we were going to have a heavy load the day it launched. We straight up asked my host, okay, hey, just so you know, we're doing this. And we want to know if we've got the bandwidth to handle it. And they're like, oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. This was honestly not even something you should worry about. Your plan, it'll be fine. And I was like, okay. And then over the weekend before we launched, Kevin, he got some volunteers who were paid in Iron Circus store goodies to pretend to back the Kickstarter, back the crowdfund. And, they took the site through its paces and everything worked fine. And so when Monday came about, we were like, oh, okay, cool. This will be great. And it definitely wasn't. But I definitely file it under good problems to have.
Right.
Because as I am fond of telling people, I've been both professionally ignored and professionally overwhelmed. And while neither is great, I'll take the latter over the former any day of the week.
This sort of reminds me of, have you ever seen The Social Network?
I've avoided it.
Okay. There's this one scene in it where Mark Zuckerberg had made this website and it crashes the Harvard server. And the IT people are completely perplexed by it because it's just it was the middle of the night. And as one of them says, basically he's just this would be high traffic for halftime at the Super Bowl. And anyways, and the whole scene is just basically about how this dumb website he makes just crashes the entire server of Harvard. And it's funny because I imagine most people who work on the server side of things cannot envision the type of traffic these types of spikes have. I do, no pun intended. They can't imagine that because there's a reason why they're called a spike. It's unusual. It's extremely unusual. So it's how do you even recreate that scenario? So again, I do think it's fascinating though, because it's you have that comes up, and then in a weird way, I don't want to say that you ever want that type of thing to happen, but it does give an extreme air of interest in what you're doing, because if it's so desirable, you break your website.
Oh, yeah.
People want to look at it. I think that's one of the underrated parts about all this is you would have done this regardless, but one of the desirable side effects of being this person who goes rogue and does their own thing and everything like that, it does draw a lot of interest, whether it's from websites or from just the general conversation online, that definitely I would say almost certainly resulted in gains for the campaign itself.
Oh, for sure. For sure. My one big regret for this project is I've talked to Kevin about this, but I put off re-enabling Google Analytics for IronCircus.com, which should have been enabled a long time ago, I know, but I took it offline for one reason or another, and I just never reinstalled it. I
You'll never
wish it
know.
was installed right now. I really do. But right now we've got the site stable and we've got it, ticking over as it should. And we don't want to mess with it before the project has actually finished, because who knows what could tip it over at this point. But I wish I knew. I wish I had metrics. I wish I had data. Data is wonderful. Data is amazing.
I was going to say, I don't want to paint with too broad of strokes, but I'm getting the vision of you as a bit of a data nerd.
Honestly, the things that interest me about the data that I get from, the projects that I fund and the projects that do well is the age range. I use it to sort of hyper focus with the knowledge that there are always going to be outliers. I don't want to turn into that person that, God, what was that story? Shoot. What is the name of the cartoonist who did Battling Boy?
Oh, Paul Pope.
Thank you. Paul Pope, originally he wanted to make a comic. He wanted to bring back this really old Jack Kirby character, Kamadi, I believe his name is.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to whoever owns Jack Kirby's old stuff and was all like, I would like to sort of reboot Kamadi. And the person said, who are you picturing selling this to? And Paul Pope was like, well, it's about a 12-year-old boy, so I figured other 12-year-old boys would like to read it. And the editor or the owner or whatever said, we don't make comics for 12-year-olds. We make comics for 45-year-olds.
Oh, boy.
And I don't want to be that person.
Right.
Iron Circus makes smut. We make a lot of smut, and I am extremely proud of the smut we make. But we also have an imprint called Sprockets, which makes comics for younger kids. I want to do everything. And while I am very interested in finding out where the sweet spot in our audience is, I never want to kind of over focus to the exclusion of outliers,
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's why I love data, and that's why I want more information, especially about the kind of advertising that works best. And from what I've seen, I guess I really shouldn't be too surprised by this. The animated trailer that we cut together for the Poorcraft Cookbook that has this sort of black and white Cuphead kind of look to it, where everyone's got the macaroni noodle arms and the Pac-Man eyes. People love clicking on that. And one of the things in Meta is they tell you how long people let the video play before they click on it. And they let that thing play all the way through. And so it's that's kind of our eureka moment. Clearly we need to do this from now on.
Let me tell you, as somebody who has run literally millions of dollars in ads on there,
Go for it.
That is unusual.
Really?
Yes, that is very unusual. Facebook generally is an odd platform for video, because it's either the fascinating thing is it's either people watching for an unbelievably short amount of time or super long periods of time. I get served ads for the dodo constantly. Do you know what the dodo is?
Yeah, this woman saved a sparrow and now it loves her forever.
Yeah, this crocodile and this chimpanzee are now best friends. And I'm like, I will watch every single one of those videos until completion. I have watched in the past year probably I don't know, a week's worth of dodo videos. That is probably not true. I hope to God that's not true. But
it's believable, though.
Yeah, it's if you deliver the right content, that goes back to the metrics, right? If you deliver the right content to the right people, you're going to have the response you want. And that's why it's important to get into that stuff to figure out who you're really trying to serve with this.
Exactly. Who is going to sit there and say, oh, this is for me? And there's always this weird tightrope I feel like I'm walking too, for two reasons. One of them is I am this. I imagine a lot of people could feel that it's forced or affected, but it's genuinely not. What Iron Circus does is what I'm into. And that means that, quite frankly, as it turns out, my interests tend to be kind of niche. And there is always the danger when you are sort of like the niche wacky publisher that someone is going to one day decide you're not being niche enough and walk away. Like us Gen Xers would probably call it selling out.
Right.
And kind of every look at me move I make, I'd be lying if I didn't say, oh, well, is this going to be the one thing where someone's like, oh, you're advertising on Facebook. Oh, you're advertising on Instagram. Oh, you're doing this, you're doing that. Oh, lame. I'm out. There's always going to be that. So I need to balance that with what level of audience do I hope to gain by doing this? Because there's always going to be someone who pieces out anytime I expend any effort.
Mm-hmm.
But also on the same end, I think this is something a lot of business people can sympathize with. And it ties back into what I was saying before about not wanting to hyper focus, because I don't want to exclude certain things that I genuinely am interested in and care about, because the metrics say, come this way, bite this poisoned apple, only advertise to people between the ages of 21 and 45.
Right.
I don't want to do that. But there is that angle where I am extremely aware of what it would take for me to, without being dramatic, increase my revenue by 100% in 2 to 3 years. I know what I would need to do. I just don't want to do it. But the knowledge is permanently sitting there on the edge of my desk.
Yeah.
Because I go to my annual reviews with my distributor. I go to their marketing seminars. I see the metrics. I know what the major demand is for. I know which markets are growing the fastest. I know what Barnes and Noble is over there on their knees begging for. I know. But that's not me. But maybe one day, maybe one day. But no, that's not me. But maybe one day. No.
I do think it's interesting, though, because you said there's at least a part of Iron Circus that's like very niche. But I think that it's interesting because obviously your niche has been very successful. But beyond that, I think that there is a bit of, and you mentioned this already a little to a certain degree, I think there's a bit of I don't want to say backlash, but something around that to things that seem obviously built for a wide audience. And when you're not serving somebody who's going to be passionate about it, you're trying to serve everybody with something that's like, this is good enough. This is like nutritious food for you. It'll give you everything you need as opposed to everything you want.
Yeah.
I think that's a fine line to walk. And it's like, I think you do a really good job of walking that because, clearly you've had, kicks. You mentioned, what was the one that did $330,000? It completely flew out of my brain right now.
There are two, actually. The most recent one was The Woman in the Woods and Other North American Stories, which is part of our Cautionary Fables and Fairy Tales collection.
Yeah, so like that, obviously people are responding to it. But, I do think it's interesting, though, because getting into the Poorcraft Cookbook itself, the graphic novel you're crowdfunding by Nero Villagallos O'Reilly, and it's a 200-plus page masterpiece of recipes, techniques, and buying tips, amazing appetizers, entertaining entrees, dazzling desserts, and creative cocktails. It's part of Poorcraft, which fundamentally is about basically helping people make more out of less, effectively, trying to do that with whether it's travel or food or just life. And I think that's interesting because while it sounds pretty, heavy on the niche side, I do think that it has a very broad appeal to it. Because as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I was reading through it and I was just like having an existential crisis as to whether or not I organize my refrigerator and kitchen correctly. Because what Nero did in there is so much smarter than what I do. I'm like, have I been thinking about this wrong completely?
Yeah, there was a bit in there about, certain produce giving off ethylene and making stuff go bad in the fridge.
Yeah.
And I was like, that explains a lot.
Also, like how the temperature changes in the refrigerator based off of kind of where it's located, and you should have meats and produce lower. And I was like, oh my god, because it's closer to the freezer. I'm like, how did I never think about this? If I told my wife this, who's an architect and is very smart about these things, she'd probably just be like, what the hell is wrong with your brain, David? And I'm like, whatever. But I do think that that's really like the type of thing that kind of can speak to anybody, because I don't know. I mean, we all cook food. We all have food in our home. I mean, like that type of thing is, it seems like Nero's done a phenomenal job of taking an idea that seems like it was a much requested one from previous Poorcraft readers and turning it into something big for you.
Yeah, he did an amazing job. And this is just the cartoonist in me. But while it's full of amazing like advice and really good recipes, field tested, I should add, one of my favorite things about it is the main character, Penny. He draws these faces on her when she is responding to certain things that are like the goofiest, funniest wild takes ever. Like there's a bit near the beginning where Penny is distributing advice to her friend Millie about you can go to the dollar store, and a lot of the stuff in the dollar store is repackaged from, you know, like reputable
Yeah.
grocery stores, like the spices. So just go to the dollar store to buy your paprika and buy your oregano and buy your garlic salt. It's all the same stuff. And you're saving a ton of money over buying it at Whole Foods or whatever. And then Millie goes, oh, there's meat over there. Should we get meat at the dollar store? And Penny just makes this face.
Yeah.
And like, that's what I'm here for. That's what I love, the cartooning.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually just recently read a Random House graphic novel called Yummy, a History of Desserts. And it was a delightful graphic novel, and I had the cartoonist on. And it was really fascinating reading that book, because if you just make it like a history book in that case, or in your case, or in Nero's case, if the Poorcraft Cookbook is just like recipe after recipe, why is it a comic? The cartooning is absolutely at the heart of it, because that's what makes it a graphic novel and makes the whole thing work.
Yeah. I think this is some of the easiest and most sort of palatable way to absorb information. And one of the things that I always like to mention is part of the reason I'm so like in the corner of educational comics is when I was in high school, I read Larry Gonick's Cartoon History of the Universe and multiple volumes of it. And I would ace my history classes without ever touching the textbook, because I just read these cartoon comics so much.
Yeah.
These comic histories so much. And I remember my teacher like literally asking me, it's like, wow, how did you, like, you know, you're literally always raising your hand in class or shouting out the answers to stuff I haven't taught yet. And I'm like, yeah, I learned it from a comic book. And he was all like, a comic book? It was like something out of a cliche. He was like, come on, a comic? And I brought it in and I showed him the first volume, which is called From the Big Bang to Alexander the Great. That's the first volume of the Cartoon History of the Universe. And he leafed through it. And I think he wound up buying it for his own kids for Christmas. So I converted someone as a child.
Yeah. I mean, I love educational comics. I love things that like teach people how to better understand the world around them. Like I also like the, you know, not to tout another publisher, but like First Second also has those science comics.
Oh, First Second is great.
Yeah, First Second science comics are amazing. And like there's this one that's about crows, and I think corvids are amazing birds. And the whole thing is just basically it's like a crow recruiting a dog to help him get food out of trash cans while explaining how corvids work to the dog. And it is super funny and it's just lovely cartooning, and the whole thing just like I feel like I am an encyclopedia about crows now, and it's amazing. Like that type of stuff is so great, and it seems like Nero does a phenomenal job of, you know, standing on both sides, making a charming cartooned narrative while also working in like an amazing recipe for like roasted veggies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people kind of, I think the best way to put it is like they don't like trust themselves to make anything that tastes good, because I understand how easy it can be to be overwhelmed by food stuff, because I love cooking. I've loved cooking for decades, And I am still running across stuff where it's like, what is this? I have no idea what you're talking about. How do you do it that way? So if you were theoretically raised in a house that didn't really emphasize that skill, and suddenly you're 23 and you're in your apartment and you're thinking to yourself, I don't have the kind of money where I can just, eat out every single night, you might just shrug and resign yourself to like tomato soup and toast. And that's so depressing.
Yeah.
Because like if you like tomato soup and toast, sure, I'm sure that's fine, but for every meal, but it's like it's possible to do better than that. It's possible to make delicious food for yourself and for people you care about and not have the completely outfitted kitchen with the KitchenAid stand mixture and the Cuisinart and all this other stuff. That stuff's nice to have, but you don't need it to make, a pot of rice and beans people will fight over.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. That sponsor is Bad Idea, and I keep asking Bad Idea what I should say here, and they keep saying wing it. So, hey, Bad Idea. Find their comics, I guess. And now, back to the show. It's funny, my wife she's been using the same rice cooker since we met, and it's actually the rice cooker her mom had when she was single before my wife was born. So it's this like, I don't know, like 45-year-old rice cooker, and it still works. It still works great. And like people are like, oh, check out my $600 rice cooker, and my wife is just like, this one still works. It's great.
Yeah, we have one that we got as a wedding gift from my brother-in-law, and we've been married 18 years, and it's still going strong.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bit in the book about of getting a rice cooker, and Penny from previous volumes of Poorcraft has this reputation of being very, anti-single use, anti-clutter kind of person, but she advocates for a rice cooker, and for good reason.
Yeah, rice cookers are amazing. It's funny, when I was growing up, my family was very much meat and potatoes. That was just like everything we would do. Like every meal had potatoes, basically. And it's one thing I think is interesting about like our relationship with food is just how you I don't know if everyone does this, but it's like I never make things with potatoes. And I think it's because when I was a kid, I don't want to say overdosed on it, but I really rolled deep on it to the point where I was just like, there's so much more out in the world. That's one thing I think is really cool about the Poorcraft Cookbook too, is it underlines that, at least from what I've seen, it underlines that just because it's like, cheaper foods or like things you get at like a dollar store or wherever, doesn't mean it can't taste good. Doesn't mean you can't do amazing things with it. And I think that's a really important thing to reflect.
Absolutely. Food doesn't have to be, from Whole Foods. I keep coming back to Whole Foods. I can't help it. It's just, I went in there once and I saw the prices and I was like, come on.
Oh my God.
Then I left. So it's my go-to now. Food doesn't have to be from Whole Foods to be worth eating and, satisfying and really delicious.
Here in Anchorage, Alaska, we don't have a Whole Foods, but we have this kind of independent version called Natural Pantry. And I remember my wife and I went in there once and we looked there and everything was like 3 times as expensive as it was anywhere else. And I'm like, why would you shop here? This is insane. But the last thing I want to say about the book is, as much as I think everything you've done for this is smart, I think the smartest thing that you did for the entire campaign, the book, the everything, is the stretch goal for concealed wire binding.
Yeah, we are super excited about that. It's going to look so good.
Yeah, for listeners that don't know, basically what it is once you reach $8,000 for this campaign, you create your every version of the book will have this concealed wire O binding that has wired, like, so when you have a cookbook and it's actually bound like a normal book, it won't stay open. It's a pain in the ass. But because you have both a wire and a nice looking spine, you kind of get the best of both worlds. And I think that is such a smart choice.
It's going to be great. I'm so excited to see how this turns out. And it was actually suggested by my print tech. I didn't even know it was a possibility before that. But the minute she brought it up, I was like, yeah, we have to. Yeah.
Okay, so to close, I want to talk about like kind of where you're at now going forward and kind of your view on everything. Obviously the Poorcraft Cookbook you said you're at 445%. It's doing great. Near as I can tell, as far as overall support, it's generated the most support of any Poorcraft Cookbook so far, and by a decent margin.
Oh yeah, it's on its way to being, if it's not already, to being the most funded Poorcraft book we've ever put out.
That's amazing. So, I mean, I would say the answer is probably very happy, but how happy are you with this first run at it? Do you feel like you're in a good place now for your upcoming crowdfunding efforts?
For our crowdfunding efforts, any anxiety or worry I had is gone. We've not just, even the skeptics at this point have to admit this is clearly working, if not universally applicably for everyone, for us. And we have kind of laid to rest any concerns we might have had about crowdfunding a book that doesn't belong to, me conceptually, because at the end of the day, sort of like the characters of Poorcraft and the concept of Poorcraft and the trademark of Poorcraft are mine. So if this had failed, it would have only hurt me. It wouldn't have hurt Nero, for example, because Nero has already been paid for making this book. I would have taken the brunt of any financial difficulties for the Poorcraft Cookbook, theoretically failing its crowdfunding effort, which I'm really fond of reminding people is fine and good, because I should be the one who gets punished if it didn't work out, because it was my idea and I am in charge of Iron Circus. And if I want to bathe in the accolades when things go well, I should also take the hits when things go badly. So that is my whole theory of publishing, founding, leadership, or whatever. But now that it's funding, we've got 2 weeks left. I have a figure in my head I'd like it to hit. I don't know if it will. If it doesn't, we're already well in the black on this book, so I'm happy. But now that everything is sort of like in stone and everyone sees that it works, my real hope is that it makes it clear to people that they have options if they feel the same way about Kickstarter doing what it's currently doing as I do.
Yeah. Were there a lot of skeptics when this was announced?
Not really. I'm always going to be nervous because, of course, I think that's natural, part of trying things that you've never tried before. But there were people, God, how to put this without sounding like a total lunatic. There were people who would have liked to see this not work because they were tired of things working out for me.
Right.
And I know how that sounds, but it's true. I swear I'm not insane.
Oh, yeah.
And and now that it has worked out, they're deeply annoyed. They're deeply annoyed. And I like that they're deeply annoyed. They should be.
Did you find that as you were getting into it or after it was announced that there was any like trepidation amongst normal backers that you had to kind of like overcome, or was it pretty much immediate buy-in from...
It was immediate buy-in. There was no hesitation. And I honestly, it didn't even occur to me there might be, because I feel once you've gotten over the hurdle labeled Kickstarter and you understand how like an Iron Circus crowdfund goes, once you see it sort of copy pasted onto ironcircus.com, you're like, oh, okay. And you just go for it. I have never had a single person yet say to me, well, I would have backed this if it was on Kickstarter, but since it's not, I won't.
I mean, it makes sense because ultimately, backing a comics Kickstarter can be a variable experience in terms of fulfillment. But backing an Iron Circus crowdfunding effort is not a variable experience. You've delivered every single time. So it's like you're the one that they trust, not necessarily the platform.
Yeah, that's kind of a thing. I do have a track record. It's something that we've earned over here. No Iron Circus project has ever failed to meet funding, and no Iron Circus project has ever failed to be delivered. We actually, one of the things I say is, we say that we've funded 31 projects on Kickstarter and fulfilled 31 projects on Kickstarter, but actually you should increase that by 1, because years ago we actually rescued a Kickstarter, which is a Mayday Trips Kickstarter for their memoir, Something Terrible. We actually stepped in and fulfilled that one for them. So we've actually fulfilled more projects on there than it looks like we have.
I love that saying 31 for 31 is actually underrating you.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's hilarious. So what do you think the biggest things you've learned from this effort? Are there things that while going through all of this that you've realized that when you do the next one in April or whenever it ends up being, you're going to need to carry forward with that?
Advertise.
Yep.
Do promotion. Don't rest on your laurels. Make sure everybody knows what everybody else is doing so you don't see work redone over and over. Do it as efficiently as possible. And make sure that you give yourself enough runway to actually get the book made, I guess. We never really worried that it wouldn't hit goal, especially hilariously, especially after the site went down. We were all like, this is going to be fine. Like,
Yeah.
this sucks right now, today, in this 24-hour period. This sucks, but it's not going to be down for a month. And that's what the Kickstarter, that's what the crowdfund is going for. But yeah, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have just taken the host's word that they had the bandwidth to handle it.
Yeah.
I would have had a little more runway, I think.
It seems to me that it, like I said earlier, it's like a double-edged sword where it's like, yeah, I mean, it sucks that it went down, but at the same time, it's reflective of interest. And thankfully, you have Kevin on your team, who's apparently an absolute boss, and everything got sorted.
He was awake for 22 hours trying to get the site back up.
No. I did a sleep deprivation project in my AP psychology class back in high school. And I remember around then was when I'm apparently not good at no sleep. But around then I was just like, no, I don't like this. I ended up going for, I think, like 39 hours. And by 39 hours, the world ceased to exist in a traditional fashion.
Yeah, in my 20s, I did a couple of all-nighters. And I discovered that when I am awake for a full day plus, everything is very funny to me. So I'll just start laughing hysterically at stuff that is definitely not funny. And I'll laugh harder when people are asking me what is funny.
Do you think that having this as an option in your back pocket, I know you're not like going to become a platform. This is all for Iron Circus. But does that make it like advantageous for you as a publisher for attracting projects? Or do you feel like, you know what you want and it doesn't really matter that you have this? It is what it is.
I think this will definitely be something in our favor when it comes to trying to compete with other publishers for books, because I'm at that point now where I think a lot of people kind of consider Iron Circus still to this day like kind of this rinky-dinky run out of my living room kind of deal. And it's like, no, I have to, step in the ring with terrifying, much larger publishers to fight for books that I want. And if this can be one of the things I can promise them, like, hey, we can send your book we could send your book to print in the black. We can give you a much nicer advance. And, when the first pay period comes around, you will get a payout because there will be a crowdfund. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily someone who signs with other publishers who may be much larger can actually promise them.
Yeah.
I think there is a level of uninformed assumption. Let's be nice about it. Uninformed assumption among a lot of people that, oh, you get your book signed and then you've made it. You're good. It's done. You are now a professional full-time author. And perhaps that is the case in prose for the select few. That is certainly not currently the case in comics, especially graphic novels with adult audiences in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to understand that, the advances that are being offered in scale for sales expectations. And if I have a crowdfunding platform that I can use to get, a couple thousand sales right out the door the instant, we're ready to send the book to press, that may be helpful to you in a way signing with a much larger publisher might not be.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading another interview with you where you said something along the lines of, like in the anthologies you could do, because like you were able to like scale up page rates based off of the success of it. You were able to offer people like effectively Marvel rates for your page rates. And that type of thing, or the fact that you can crowdfund things yourself now, those are compelling advantages that a lot of other publishers can't really hang with. So I can't imagine it wouldn't have an impact on you, on Iron Circus.
Yeah, every once in a while, I'll get someone, or I'll see something, and someone will be like, oh, they only pay $75 per page. And it's like, I know I'm an adult. I know I'm now over 40 because 20-year-old me would be in those mentions, but like 40-year-old me is all like, well, yeah, 75 is literally the starting rate. I've never paid a page rate that low in my history of paying people page rates.
Yeah, yeah.
Because every Kickstarter is like, anthology is like padding, doubling, tripling the page rate, more than that. I'm writing checks for $8,000 for 25-page submissions for for Iron Circus stuff, and that makes me feel good. That makes me happy that I can contribute to someone being a full-time artist in that way.
That's amazing. Well, to close, I want to talk about like a broader subject from your perspective. Obviously, you first started on Kickstarter in 2009. The world of comics has changed dramatically since then. I actually just had Mark Siegel on from First Second and just talking to him about how everything has shifted since he started kind of brewing that up in 2005. I think a lot of people who are newer to comics really would have a difficult time imagining how different things were back in 2009. As far as like,
God, yeah.
I mean, the book market has exploded. Crowdfunding has become more viable than ever. And there's also more players in that than ever.
Oh, yeah.
Varying digital platforms are thriving as long as your name isn't Comixology right now. And new money is coming in constantly, it seems. It's looking at it holistically now. It feels like, there's been a lot of change really fast. But I'm interested in how that has felt from like the inside. Is it kind of difficult to even consider how much everything has shifted over the last few years, let alone the past 13 or so?
Honestly, it's wild to sort of think about when I was getting into comics, and when I say getting into, in sort of a sense of, let me see if I can't do this professionally, not like on a hobby level.
Yeah.
Comics was kind of staggering around. A lot of people were convinced it wouldn't even be around in 10 years. It was doing that poorly. And that was, DC laying off a third of its staff, Marvel declaring bankruptcy level stuff. And I was just sort of like, okay, but this is like the medium I love and I want to work in. And if I make poverty wages doing it, so be it. I'll figure something out was kind of something I always thought, where, yeah, all these people say I can't make it work, but I bet I can.
Yeah.
I can figure something out. Like, surely something will have to work out eventually. And that's been my approach since like the turn of the century. And the thing that I have seen change most in comics between like the late noughties and now is there's always been sort of that person present who, the best way to describe it is, they weren't team comics. They were a carpetbagger, or they were someone trying to take advantage of creative types in a extremely exploitative and capitalist way. The guy who kind of slithers around Artist's Alley trying to buy the rights to people's comics for $1 and act like he's doing you a favor doing it. Like that guy, he's been in comics for decades. There's nothing new about that guy. I have just found that guy has now started asexually budding and dropping little clones of himself everywhere.
Yeah.
And the stuff that occasionally shows up in my inbox and the stuff that approaches me on the con floor, it feels like everyone kind of saw Marvel by Disney, Disney by Marvel, and then make a bunch of comic book movies and have decided that we are now officially the waiting room for Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
So we get a lot of people who aren't team comics. We get a lot of people who really couldn't care less about comics, about graphic novels, about anything. They just think this is their ticket into being a screenwriter or something. And I get stuff in my inbox, in our slush pile, because Iron Circus has an open door policy. You can submit a proposal to Iron Circus as long as you follow our submission guidelines. Anyone can do it. And I get stuff in my submissions box in the slush pile that starts out, I tried to get this made into a movie, but it's not working, so I guess it's a comic now. And it's kind of like being a girl in high school and a guy is hitting on your best friend relentlessly all week. And then on Friday, 10 minutes before the bell, after your best friend has told him off for the 100th time, he sighs and then looks at you and looks you up and down and then goes, okay, I guess you'll do. It's like, do you think I'm going to date you when you come at me like that? Like, you don't care about me. You clearly want that over there. By all means, go make a movie. Please be Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith maxed out his credit cards and made Clerks. Don't expect me to be your handmaiden into Hollywood. I'm not here to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It is interesting to see how, as the opportunities and the perception of opportunities has increased in comics, that the opportunists have arrived as well. And that's always going to happen. I mean, anything that starts making more money, anything that, especially today, where it's like everything is like a war over IP. I remember I wrote an article once and a production company reached out and asked if they could option. I'm like, why would you option this? I'm like, it was not that good of an article, I swear.
It's very weird. Yeah, but tweets are getting optioned.
Oh my God. Yeah. I blame shit my dad says. You remember that? I mean, as soon as that got turned into a show, I was like, it's over. Everything is going to get turned into something.
Yeah. And again, that's sort of also like kind of sitting on the edge of my desk. That's that sort of dark side thing that I've talked about where, where do you draw the line? Where I don't close the door to, if I love a comic, I'm going to sign it and I'm going to publish it. And if it turns out a lot of other people love that comic, when, let's just pretend Disney comes knocking, I'm not going to slam the door in their face because that's not up to me. I have to do right by my creators.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, the most important thing, I didn't get into comics to not make comics.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, as with everything you've done, you have looked at the world that you have in front of you and you've taken the best opportunities for you, and you just keep finding new ways to succeed. And I love it, Spike. I mean, it's amazing. That's all I have for you, though. So thank you so much for coming on to talk about the Poorcraft Cookbook, going your own way with the crowdfunding and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, David. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with the publisher of Iron Circus Comics, C. Spike Trotman. You can find her on Twitter at Iron Spike and her latest crowdfunding effort on ironcircus.com. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter and Instagram at SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Cameron Brown, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submit Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buwan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Guarino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiampang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Paul Slates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Cheng, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comic Star in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode